the Congo Free State and King Leopold Genocide. Welcome back to your True African History channel. Today, we will uncover the worst genocide in modern history, the Congo Genocide. I am Mr. Cooper, your host. We have a good and long topic today, so let's get to it. One of the worst chapters in colonial history was authored by King Leopold of Belgium, whose imperial ambitions and personal greed were at the center of the horrific history of the Congo Free State. Amidst the scramble for Africa, when European nations partitioned Africa into colonies, the narrative commences in the late 19th century. Rather of governing Belgium like his contemporaries did, Leopold wanted to acquire an African empire for himself, not as an integral part of Belgium, but as a private domain. The question most people ask is, why? Well, because Leopold knew the Congo has an abundance of natural resources, particularly rubber, and he could get his way through by means of armed force. Claiming to be in the Congo to help the Dark Continent become more civilized through humanitarian aid and development, Leopold presented himself to the world as a kind benefactor. Yet the truth was far darker. He was taking advantage of the Congolese people to amass fortune from rubber, a crucial component of the Western car industry's expanding market. The fast growth of the automotive industry in the US and Europe at the turn of the century made rubber an essential commodity. A rubber boom occurred as a result of the high demand for rubber, especially for tires and other industrial goods. Wild rubber vines in the Congo could be picked for their latex, but the operation was arduous and required a large labor force. The Congolese were compelled to work by Leopold's government, and those who did not fulfill their quotas were subjected to terrible punishments. The force publique, the enforcers of King Leopold's rubber quotas, resorted to brutal and cruel means to subdue the populace. Cutting off people's hands was a particularly infamous tactic. Soldiers were given the task of gathering the hands of those who were slain or whose rubber quotas were not met. In addition to serving as a cruel form of punishment, this practice was designed to demonstrate that no bullet was spared when it came to the indigenous population. Men were hacked to pieces, women were whipped to death, and children were starved to death. Leopold's agents systematically murdered tens of thousands of people to ensure that their quotas of rubber were met, writes E.D. Morel, a horrifying account from a British journalist who revealed the crimes in the Congo. There was a systematicity to Leopold's inhumane practices. Entire populations were eradicated and entire villages were taken captive to guarantee the harvest of rubber. The entire Congo population is being wiped out, historian George Washington Williams stated in 1890, a witness to the atrocities committed by Leopold's dictatorship. If what Leopold is doing isn't extermination, then it's slavery. The population of the Congo declined significantly during King Leopold's reign. There were an estimated 50 million people living in the realm when Leopold came to power. The population had dropped to about 8 to 10 million by the time Belgium officially assumed control of the Congo in 1908. Researchers have put the number of casualties caused by Leopold's exploitation anywhere from 35 million. However, when accounting for factors like starvation, disease, and societal upheaval, some have put the number as high as 40 million. As a point of contrast, about 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust, one of the best documented genocides in human history. On the other hand, 30 to 35 million Congolese lost their lives, and no one noticed or mentioned it in mainstream media. There may have been a tremendous number of casualties in the Congo Free State, but Leopold's genocide is still mostly ignored in comparison to Holocaust-era atrocities. This historical amnesia occurs for multiple reasons. Historical memory has been heavily influenced by European powers, who have frequently downplayed or disregarded horrors that occurred within their colonies. This narrative is Eurocentric. As long as Europe maintained its story of a civilizing mission in Africa, the genocide in the Congo did not fit. Leopold's skill in influencing public opinion through his propaganda machine was also influential. Even as the horror was being carried out, Leopold made tremendous efforts to portray himself as a compassionate monarch. Years passed before the facts regarding the atrocities in the Congo were revealed, all because of how persuasive his propaganda was. Many European nations still maintained political and economic ties to the area, so they were hesitant to admit the full scope of the atrocities, even after the discovery. Racism and dehumanization. The terrible events in the Congo were downplayed by many Westerners in comparison to the horrors committed in Europe. Because Africans were stereotyped as being less civilized, the moral significance of millions of deaths was downplayed compared to past genocides. In his book, King Leopold's Ghost, historian Adam Hochschild highlights the following. The Congo atrocities remain one of the greatest silences in modern history. Europe closed its ears to the cries of the victims because it was busy turning a blind eye to the fate of those deemed inferior. The Congolese were perpetually mired in misery and terror during Leopold's rule. Maintaining order was the responsibility of the harsh colonial force known as the force publique. Communities were leveled and local chiefs were frequently tortured and murdered if their communities did not produce enough rubber. The Congo's forced labor system was a kind of gendered violence, particularly against women, as feminist historian Cynthia Enlow points out in her writings on colonial violence. Sexual assault against women, who were frequently enslaved by the force publique, was a glaring example of the regime's savagery. Socially, the practice of forced labor resulted in the disintegration of old institutions and the spread of illness and famine. As men were forcibly removed from their communities to labor for the dictatorship, families were shattered, and the children and women within were left defenseless against abuse and neglect. The mental toll was enormous, and many people who lived through Leopold's rule never fully recovered from the horrors they had witnessed. The Belgian government formally annexed the Congo in 1908, removing it from Leopold's personal control, following the pinnacle of the worldwide outrage. Even while it was not quite as violent as under Leopold's rule, the Belgian Congo still exploited the country's people and resources. Political instability, tyranny, and civil war characterize the post-independence history of the Congo, which is just as sad. Following Patrice Lumumba's killing by the French government and Mobutu Sese Seko's tyranny, the nation fell into a vicious cycle of instability after gaining independence from Belgium in 1960. A staggering 10 to 40 million people lost their lives in the Congo as a result of Leopold II's policies of brutality, disease, forced labor, and starvation. Ultimately, the terrible catastrophe that was King Leopold II's rule over the Congo Free State is overlooked in global history, due it does not fit the Europeans' narrative. A permanent mark was left on the Congolese people and on world history by the death toll, which was driven by the unquenchable desire for rubber and the brutal means of control.